with a congregation where my dad used to preach. And that takes us back 35 to 30 years ago was the time period. So shows how old some of us are getting. But anyway, my dad had fond memories of the church here and deeply enjoyed his time here at the congregation here. I want to share with you during the next few minutes and explain a little bit more why we're focusing so much on spiritual transformation in our work in Zambia. It has to do with the Great Commission. And if you look at that passage which was read a few minutes ago, the bottom line is make disciples. That's really what the passage is saying, make disciples. Now that raises a question. First of all, what is a disciple? Well, a disciple is just simply someone who follows Jesus, who follows in the way of Jesus. It goes back really to the Greek philosophy, days of the Greek philosophy, where someone is a disciple of a philosopher. It means not that you're just listening to him and of interest, like today we might go to college and take a class, and we may or may not agree with the teacher. Just as long as you pass the test, that's all that really matters. But in the days of the Greek philosophers, to be a disciple of a philosopher meant that you were learning his way of life, you bought into it, and you're trying to acquire and follow in the way of life that philosopher was teaching. So to be a disciple of Jesus is a lot more than just listening to Jesus and taking and picking and choosing what you want to listen to. Or you might say it's like that of an apprentice. An apprentice is someone who's learning from a master craftsman how to make a certain product. But an apprentice is not free to do whatever they want to and make the product the way they want to by their inspiration. They are learning the way to do it exactly the way that the master craftsman is teaching them to do it. So Jesus makes this very clear himself. Make disciples and teach them or train them to obey all, not part, but all that I've commanded you. So we would say a disciple is one who is learning and adopting a new way of living that is in accordance with the teachings of Jesus. What we're talking about here is spiritual transformation. That's what's involved in making a disciple. We're talking about a total life transformation, especially for some people, it is a major life transformation. Well, the next question that we ask, and the one we're going to spend most of the time talking about this morning, is how do you make a disciple like that? How do we make disciples? Well, if you look at the original language, there's just one verb. It's an imperative. Now in English, it looks like there are 4 verbs, but in Greek, there's just one verb. It's an imperative, a command. Make disciples. And then you have 3 participles that modify the main verb. In other words, they describe how you make a disciple. You make a disciple by going, by baptizing them, and teaching them to obey Jesus. Now, I think we have done a great job of going all over the world, and we've baptized a lot of people, planted a lot of churches, but I am not so sure that we missionaries have done the best job that we should have in teaching people what it really means to be a disciple, because that takes a lot of time. I've often said if you want to come to Zambia and baptize a bunch of people and plant some churches, just buy a round trip ticket, come for a week, throw a dart somewhere on the map, we'll go there. We can baptize a bunch of people and plant a church in just a week or 2. But if you want to make a disciple in Africa, you're going to have to buy a one-way ticket and come and plan to stay for 3, 4, 5 years. It takes more time to make a disciple. And I think one of the shortcomings we've had here in this country as well is maybe we haven't done such a great job of making disciples here in the United States. I have come to the conclusion that to make a disciple requires mentoring. That, I think, is one of the big missing pieces. It involves mentoring, and that takes time. A mentor is a Christian who provides guidance, support, wisdom to another person, usually a new Christian, to help them in order to grow spiritually, to become like Christ. Or we might say mentors share their knowledge, their experience. They offer constructive feedback. They act as role models, and they provide emotional and spiritual encouragement. We need mentors. And I think the key here is we make disciples through relationships. And that's the one point I want to make this morning, is that we make disciples through relationships. It's all about relationships. And I think we need to think a little different about the way we think and talk about evangelism. There's nothing wrong with the word. It's a biblical word. It just means to announce or to herald good news. Nothing wrong with the word. But the word evangelism, as it's come down through the centuries, has taken on a lot of baggage, and a lot of people don't like that word. And they don't want to talk about it, and they don't want to do it, and don't want to hear about it. When we talk about evangelism, we're mainly talking about teaching. You teach someone what to do in order to get baptized. And we've developed a lot of different methods to do that. If any of you remember my dad, he used a lot of Jewel Miller film strips back in his day. I remember when I was a kid, he let me go with him, and I got the job of turning the knob. And I took that so seriously. He didn't let me start the record player. He had to do that. I thought I'd scratch it, I think. But I got to turn the knob. And boy, I was so serious when that bell went ding, ding. I felt like their salvation depended on me turning it at just the right moment. How many of y'all remember Jewel Miller? You're showing your age. You remember? Then we got high tech and we got cassettes. I know the young people saying, what's a cassette? Like 8-track tapes, But those were in the days, and it worked very well for my dad. He used a lot of those methods. But one of the things is you look on a lot of these methods that we've developed, a lot of them are intimidating. And we don't want to do evangelism. We're afraid of rejection, especially the idea of, door knocking. God forbid we do that. And the social pressure that we run in today. It's not safe in the workplace anymore to talk about your faith. That's like one of those big no-nos, probably number one. And some people get fired for even trying to do that. And of course, we think of evangelism as something that requires special skills. And so you hear people talking about someone has the gift of evangelism. Now, I've not really read that in the Bible. And the thing I've noticed about the gift of evangelism, I don't think I've ever run into anyone who thinks they have the gift. It's always someone else who has the gift of evangelism. But a lot of these methods, I know when I started in the ministry, they started feeling pretty artificial to me. They just didn't feel natural. And so I didn't ever really start using those methods. But one of the things that I'm really concerned about, and the way we've done and thought about evangelism in the past, is they're focused mainly on teaching someone what to do to become a Christian. It's largely teaching, and it's about getting someone, teaching them what to do to be baptized. But what is a Christian? Do people really know what that is anymore? Now, in my dad's day, that was great because, people had grown up. A lot of people had gone to church. They at least knew the Bible, respected the Bible, had appreciation for at least biblical principles, even if they didn't go to church. And they kind of knew right and wrong. But I'm telling you what, today, the younger generations, they don't know what the Bible says, and they don't care. And it ain't going to tell them how to live their life. That's an old, archaic thing that doesn't have relevance to their day. Do people really know what it is to follow Christ? What it really means to be a disciple of Jesus? We're again talking about spiritual transformation. Teaching people what it really means to be a disciple and to follow in the way of Jesus, teaching people to obey Jesus. And that's where I come to the role of mentoring. You see, the way we've been thinking about evangelism seems to focus on teaching, but I think mentoring encompasses all of that. It's about building a relationship with someone. And I think we could take a lesson from Alcoholics Anonymous. That has proven to be one of the best. It's not perfect by any means, but it has shown to be probably one of the better programs to try to help people get off of drugs and alcohol and other addictions, gambling and other things. And in Alcoholics Anonymous, you have to have a sponsor. because you need someone that you can call, usually in the evenings or when you're bored, someone you can call when you're being tempted to fall back in those old habits, back into that addiction, someone you can call or get with for coffee and can encourage you to not fall off the wagon, to stay sober. You need that sponsor, and that's an integral part of Alcoholics Anonymous. And they have the group meetings. If you're really struggling, especially in the beginning, you may find yourself going to those meetings every day or every evening. We also have our group meetings. We call them the assemblies. That's what we're doing right here this morning. The Hebrew writer wrote to the church that he wrote to the Hebrews. They seemed to be Jewish Christians who had gotten weak in their faith. Some of them, because of persecution, were thinking about going back into Judaism. And he says, God forbid. What we have in Christ is so much better than what we had under the old law. And he says, why would you go back to that? But he says in chapter 10, he says, don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together as some of you are now in the habit of doing. You see, they were becoming weak in their faith, and he says, no wonder some of you are missing the assemblies, because you see, the assemblies is where we get together and we encourage one another. In fact, he says in the previous verse, we gather together to spur one another on towards love and good deeds. We need those group meetings where we encourage one another to follow the way of Jesus. And we need sponsors, because we're all addicted to sin. I don't care who you are. There are weaknesses in your life. There are things that God would like for you to deal with and to overcome in your life. Struggles. Maybe it's anger or greed or whatever it is. There are areas in our life that we struggle with. I know I struggle every time I get behind the wheel on the interstate and people keep pulling in front of me. I have a little bit of... I've been having to work on not blowing my horn at certain people. I don't know. You pick different things. I don't care who you are. There's things you're struggling with. We're all addicted to sin, and we need one another to help us in our common effort to walk in the way of Jesus. I think it all comes down to relationships. And so I don't want to use the word evangelism. We don't use that in Zambia anymore. I talk about disciple making. And I think it begins by building a relationship. It's about building friendships. You do that by acts of kindness and by serving and being a friend to people and giving them of your time. We know the dropout rate, research has shown us over and over and over that more than 76% of new Christians fall away within 6 months if they have not made at least 2 or 3 meaningful friendships within the church. I don't know if you have ever gone on some of these campaigns. We get in a bus, we go off to Iowa or something, like one trip I made on a campaign, and we knocked on doors, we signed up people for World Bible School courses, and we invited them to come to a gospel meeting that night. And during the week, 2 or 3 people got baptized. But then we got back in our bus and we came back to Tennessee. We go back and visit a year later, and we look around and say, "Where's old Joe? Where's Martha?" And they go, "Who? They were baptized when we were here last year, the campaign." "Oh, yeah. Yeah, they came for 2 or 3 weeks and then they kind of just disappeared." You see, the problem is we kind of built a relationship with them, but we left them and went back to Tennessee, and the people in the church didn't really build those relationships, and they fell away. And it's pretty predictable that will happen. We need those relationships within the body of Christ. It's about a community of faith that walks together and encourages one another and spurs one another on towards love and good deeds. And I think this is all involved in disciple making. And it involves the people you work with, your grandkids, neighborhood kids, or your neighbors, the people you work with. Just whoever you're in their life. You build friendships, you minister to them. And then the opportunities can arise that you can share the gospel with them. Making disciples, I think, involves relationships, mentoring, and that takes time. And so we're teaching our students in Zambia to do it this way. Every weekend, our students are going out into surrounding villages, and we tell them, you go out there and you begin by serving. You find a widow whose house is leaking, you rethatch a roof. You find a man who's sick, who can't plant, harvest, or tend to his crops, you help him with that. A guy's bicycle is broke, you help him fix it. Someone's sick, you pray with them. You walk 5 miles and buy medicine for them. You just go out there and you begin to serve and minister to people in whatever way you can. And it's not about giving money. The last thing in the world we do in Zambia is give people money. I don't have time to get into this, but I'll tell you, a lot of our so-called benevolence programs actually hurt our efforts to reach out. It's about giving yourself, not your money. It's about giving your time and building relationships with people. And as you do that, the opportunities will arise. You'll have the opportunity. You pray about it. And I, in my own experience, I've never not had the opportunity at some point in someone's life to share my faith with them and to tell them about the Bible and the will of God. Disciple making, it happens through relationships. And I think Jesus taught his disciples this approach. He sent them out there on the first practical ministry, you might would say, as they're in training to be disciple makers. He sends them out there and he says, go out and heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. He sent them out there to serve people, show them the love of God. And then he says, don't take a coat or money or sandals and any of that. When you enter into a city, find someone who is worthy. Luke says, find a man of peace, someone who's open to the Lord. You find someone like that and they invite you into your house and you go and you stay with them. You accept their hospitality. And I never really quite understood why Jesus sent them out. Don't take any money, sandals, your staff. You know, what's this about? I didn't understand until I went to Africa and I was trained in mission work, in college. Missionary 101 is that when someone invites you to their house in Africa, you cannot refuse. You've got to go and accept their hospitality. And whatever they offer you to eat, you got to eat it. Now, I didn't like that. And I had to eat all kinds of things. I bet y'all know about this with your parents. I had to eat all kinds of things that y'all don't want me, because we want to go eat in a few minutes, right? Okay. If I do, then nobody will want to eat. But anyway, there were things I had to eat. I remember I learned real quick, don't ask. You don't want to know. I remember one time early on, I was sitting there and I was eating something. I thought, I didn't know y'all had broccoli in Kenya. And the guy says, we don't. And then he told me what it was. Didn't want to know. So I just don't ask. You got to eat it. Now, what is that about? It's because it is through hospitality that people in Eastern cultures, as it was in Jesus' day, as it was in the Old Testament, as it is in still most of the world, hospitality is how people build relationships, the giving and receiving of hospitality. And what Jesus was teaching his disciples is you go out there and you don't take stuff so you can be independent. You go out there so you have to depend on people's hospitality and build those relationships, because that's where the first churches started, was where the disciples received hospitality. And this is very personal, this approach to disciple making, because if you're going to spend time with people and be there in their life, they're going to see who you really are. And if there is sin in your life that you're ignoring and you're not dealing with, they're going to see that and they're going to think, well, he's just a hypocrite. You know, the number one thing that people say about Christians that turns them off, they say, well, they're all just a bunch of hypocrites. And I'm sorry, it's true. A lot of the time, it's true. And they see right through the facade, the masks we wear. I think we ought to just stop pretending. We're not perfect. And it's okay. It's really okay if you're with someone and you say, yeah, I struggle with this and I'm working on it. And, I have this real anger problem, as you've seen, and I'm working on it and praying about it. And God's helping me deal with it. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be real. I'm trying to be what God is calling me to be. And you don't have to have all the answers. If you don't know the answer, say, I don't know. But we got a preacher and he seems to know Bible pretty good. Maybe we can go talk to him, or I'll try to find an answer. It's okay not to have the answers. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be real and genuine, because that's what people are really looking for. Let me share with you right quick, in the last couple of minutes I have here, why what we're doing in Zambia, focusing on spiritual transformation, is so important. Why focusing on the spiritual life and character is so important. You may or may not be aware, but the gravitational center of Christianity has shifted from the northern western hemisphere to the southern hemisphere. And if you read anything in missions these days, it's all about the so-called global south, because that is where Christianity has shifted now. And you can look at the numbers. According to the best research that I could find on this, there are now more people professing to be Christians in Africa than any other continent in the world. It's not America, it's Africa. 700 million people in Africa now profess to be Christian. And twice as many people go to church on Sunday morning in Africa than go to church here in North America and Europe combined. There are now more members of the Church of Christ and more churches of Christ in Africa than there are here in the United States. So when you think about what a member of the Church of Christ looks like now, he doesn't look like most of us here in this auditorium. He's a person of color. Christianity has become a global phenomenon. And they're telling us by the year 2050, there's going to be 1.3 billion people, 1.3 million people in, get that right, 1.3 billion. I had it right first time. 1.3 billion people in Africa professing to be Christian. That's going to be twice as many as any other continent, which would be South America, and it's heavily Catholic. But here's our problem in Africa. Too much growth too fast is a serious problem. It's a real problem. How do you develop enough spiritual leaders for all these churches? Now, they have leaders. Boy, they just don't know the Bible, and they sure don't live like Jesus would want them to live. They haven't been trained. They haven't been developed. They don't really know what Christianity is about, and they haven't learned to apply it to their life. So we have a lot of leaders, but we just haven't developed. It's not just in the Church of Christ, it's denomination. Everybody's having this problem. Compare it with McDonald's. If there was enough people out there that wanted to buy their hamburgers and they were going to double in the next 5 years, they couldn't do it. They couldn't grow that fast. They couldn't build enough stores, restaurants, hire enough managers and assistant managers and train them, and the trucks and the truck drivers and the warehouses and all the logistics. They couldn't do it. We have grown so fast in Africa. How in the world do we develop enough spiritual leaders for all these churches that are springing up? People are wanting Christianity. They want Jesus in their life. They believe in the way of the Bible. They just don't understand it yet. And we got witchcraft and paganism with Christianity put on top of it. It hasn't yet integrated and transformed their life. That's why we're hearing all the horror stories we're hearing in Africa. In Zambia, our government leaders go to church every Sunday, and then they're out there taking bribes and stealing from the Zambian treasury, full of corruption, horrible corruption in Africa now. You see, that's why I believe leadership training is the most important thing that we need to be doing in the church today in Africa, because of what is going on in Africa. Now, they hear what's going on in America, and I have these very uncomfortable conversations. They hear about, churches in America and in Europe about homosexuality and homosexuals becoming priests and all that stuff. And then they say, is it true that in America men are becoming women and women becoming men? I have that awkward conversation. It's just few people. It's not where most Americans are. You got to understand. But they only hear the bad, and they think, boy, I thought y'all were smarter than us. I thought y'all knew biology. Anyway, they hear what's going on in America, and they know the church Christianity in the Western world is declining. And when I have these conversations, you know what almost every one of them says to me? One day we're going to send missionaries to America. Have y'all heard that? I hear it all the time in Africa now. Among church leaders. One day we're going to send missionaries to America. Folks, it's already happening in Europe. I want to share some exciting news here. This is already happening in Europe. Significant migration. You know, you've heard about all the Asians moving into Europe, mainly because of Islam, especially out of Syria because of the civil war that was there. They got all these Muslims moving in. But what you don't hear about in the news, because Africa's never in our news, there are thousands and thousands moving into Europe. Last year, they estimate 3,400 people drowned in the Mediterranean trying to cross over at Gibraltar and over to Sicily there from Libya, because those are the nearest points of contact. There are thousands of people migrating into Europe. And if you know anything about Christianity in Europe, you know that among white European, traditional white Europeans, Christianity is dead. They don't go to church. Less than 4% of white traditional Europeans go to church on Sunday. If it wasn't for Catholics in Spain, France, and Italy, I dare say it'd be less than 1% go to church on Sunday. And if you've gone to Europe, you can go and you can find these big, beautiful buildings. And every once in a while when I drop off in Europe going to and from Africa, I'll go to some of these big museums. They're incredible. And the paintings on the wall and the gold and everything that's there. And I go in and I find someone who's a janitor or someone in the gift shop. And I'll say, is there a church that meets here? And they'll go, oh, no. There's no church. Oh, well, they have a special ceremony on Christmas and Easter. And sometimes we have a wedding here. Once or twice I had them say, yeah, I think there's a group that meets out there in the wing, in the basement on Sunday morning. But folks, there are thousands of Africans moving to Europe. And 700 million of them profess to be Christians. What do you think they're doing when they're getting to Europe? They're not going to those big dead cathedrals. They're starting house churches all over Europe. I was in Athens, Greece 2 years ago visiting the missionary there. And I went to church with him on Sunday. And half the church were Africans. I mean, they were there from Kenya and Ghana and one or two from Zambia even, and Kenya and South Africa. And I mean, people we had known and met or knew people they knew. And Lori and I, we just had a wonderful time visiting with us. And the missionary finally says, I got to go. And he drug us out of there. And afterwards, I asked him, I said, tell me, how many members of the Church of Christ are there here in Athens, Greece? He said, I have no idea. They're all over the place. It's just that I don't know that they're here and they don't know I'm here. But every once in a while, I'll run into someone and find they're a member of the Church of Christ from Nigeria or Ghana or somewhere. And they've started a house church. Africans are planting house churches all over Europe. They're reseeding Christianity into Europe again. And they're saying one day they're going to come here. I want to close with some good news, folks. The kingdom of God is not in decline. I know in America and Europe, you know, it kind of looks discouraging right now when we see what's going on in our country spiritually. But I'm telling you, Christianity is not in decline. Since World War II, Christianity has spread throughout the entire world. Look at the numbers I shared with you earlier. It has become a global phenomenon. You can compare with 1900 to where it is today and where we're headed, and you can see it's just the reverse. Most people who profess to be Christians are not going to be in the Western world. We're going to be a minority in the world. Christianity is growing all over the world, and the number of missionaries has increased beyond imagination. They're just not American. We don't know exactly, but there's probably less than 100 missionaries, American missionaries, who have been in the field 3 years or longer. There's less than 100. And in Africa, I hardly know of very many. There's not many American missionaries anymore from the Church of Christ. But you know how many African missionaries there are? Thousands. Thousands of them. They're not on support. They don't worry about passports and visas. They just swim that river. They go to that next tribe. They go to that next country. And you know who's going to evangelize the Islamic world? It ain't going to be Americans. It's going to be Africans and Asians. And they're already doing it. Do you know where we're having the greatest, in the Islamic world, do you know where the number one country we're having the most people turn to Christianity right now? Iran. It's exciting stuff happening in Iran right now, a so-called Muslim country. Folks, Christianity is not in decline. And folks, we know who wins in the end, right? We're going to offer the invitation. If you're here this morning and you need to give your life to the Lord and become a disciple of Jesus, we're going to give you that opportunity. If you need the prayers of the church for any reason, we're going to encourage you to come and right now as we stand and sing.